I was with my mother when she was diagnosed with breast cancer. I was with her when she was told her cancer had returned. I was also with her the day she died 5 years after her original diagnosis. She was only 49 years old. She was my hero and she was gone. I was determined to empower myself to avoid the same fate. I took action by focusing on prevention, and I monitored my efforts with medical infrared technology, or what some would call breast thermography. After utilizing my strategy for over 20 years, I relocated from Los Angeles to San Luis Obispo, California. I soon discovered that most doctors and women in the area were not aware of thermography. This was unacceptable to me. I changed course and I became a board-certified medical thermographer. It was my mission to empower local women and doctors in my community with this state-of-the-art technology. So as I continued down my journey, I decided to go ahead and advertise and let women know that thermography is a wonderful alternative and option for women who do not want to have mammograms. I mean, even the United States government warned us that, mammograms could be dangerous and actually lead to cancer and or metastasize existing cancer. So I finally felt vindicated that I was right all those years, and I know that the radiologist groups and the cancer societies and even the FDA have basically sided with the companies and organizations who have a vested interest in mammography, and that's very disturbing. So I wanted to make sure that, because they have the kind of financial power to really get out there and advertise and brainwash women into whatever they want to try to manipulate us into utilizing. When I decided that I wanted to put the word out that thermography is a wonderful alternative for women of all ages, all breast types, totally non-invasive. It's just about collecting information that's unique to you. All of a sudden, it seemed to be that I had basically poked the hornet's nest. This led to an unexpected turn of events. Not only were hundreds of women sharing their personal horror stories with me, stories of deception, bullying, unrelenting fear, and brutality, but doctors were also coming forward with warnings of dangerous medical practices commonly used. This was not just at a local level. It was much bigger than that. We had poked a hornet's nest worth multi-billions of dollars annually. Their effort to protect their extraordinarily successful business model is backfiring. More and more women are questioning and demanding answers, and hundreds of doctors are also insisting the curtain of lies be pulled back to reveal what some would consider criminal action by those complicit in this corporate-driven, government-sanctioned barbarism. How many more women will suffer and die because critical information is deliberately kept from them?
So what about mammography? Mammography is the greatest fraud ever perpetrated upon women in this nation, and indeed in the world. The initial trials done in New York and in Sweden were frauds. We now know that. They excluded women. For instance, if you were in the study and you died, then you were excluded from the study because you didn't finish the study. Well, what a great way to skew the data. Women that did well were counted twice in some of the studies. So right from the inception, there was deception.
Mammography is not all that it's cracked up to be, and there are serious critics of mammography. When they form panels to assess the prudence of continuing with a standard of mammography for breast cancer detection, they frequently experience from members of their own panel, including, for example, Dr. Charles B. Simone, that this is not the way to go, that this is a seriously flawed approach, that actually the testing can increase your risk of breast cancer. But in addition to that, it's not that successful in enabling women to understand when they have breast cancer or detect it in enough time to give them any reasonable chance of fending off the occurrence of it.
In my 21 years of experience of seeing patients being caught in this system that only propagates inflammation, that has caused me to come to the point where if it's my wife and my daughter, no, I'm not going to have them have a mammogram as my recommendation. Certainly, they're individuals unto themselves and they can make that decision, but it would be my recommendation to find a better technology. And I would guide them in that and say, you know what? If you do thermography, you're going to have an opportunity to see these inflammatory patterns many years before it could ever be visualized as a mass on a mammogram, and you're not going to be irradiating yourself, thereby increasing your potential to create a cancer.
Society needs to be re-educated on the worth or lack of worth of mammography, because I think it's a travesty.
Mammography is an outdated study. It is a study that makes no sense. It makes no sense because you are putting 44 pounds of pressure on the breast, which is the equivalent of 3 bowling balls, so take that as a visual. You are radiating women, and you're trying to find out if they have a disease that's caused by radiation by giving them radiation, which in itself makes it illogical.
The women who get their annual mammogram are at higher risk for breast cancer, probably from the radiation, probably partly from the incredible pressure put on the breasts to create the mammography picture.
And the head of the American Cancer Association, whose name is Otis Brawley, who's a physician, has said things like, we need a 21st century definition of cancer, we need a better breast test, and most recently, the comment which is, we're way over treating cancers because most breast cancers, when found on diagnostic testing, would not cause a significant change in the longevity of the woman that we're testing, because the cancer that has been found is not a cancer that's life-threatening. And they're doing it on patients with DCIS, which not only the American Cancer Society, but a number of physicians are saying, why are we treating DCIS like cancer when it isn't?
The signifier for calcification in the breast for a doctor is, oh, it could be a sign of cancer. So they immediately go crazy. They want to do a mammogram, more mammograms. They want to do a biopsy. They want to actually say it's precancerous, but it probably is just calcification. They will call it DCIS, the precancerous form of breast cancer, and actually in the statistics say, oh, well, we cured this by doing the biopsy. Really, they're just taking out this breast calcification from the overuse of calcium in our society.
So if we cut to the chase, to me this study says it all. There was a 25-year Canadian study that was done on women between the age of 40 to 59, and this was done on 90,000 women. So 25 years, 90,000 women. And they found that mammograms did not reduce breast cancer mortality rate, not even by 1%. And that a mammogram was just as effective in finding a tumor as a breast self-exam. So how important it is to really discover and learn how to do a proper breast self-exam.
More women are finding out that radiation is a concern, and every time you have a mammogram, there's 2 views or 3 views or even more views if a woman's called back. So there's more radiation each breast every year for decades, and that definitely we know has an impact on even on the incidence of cancer of the breast.
When you look at the technology behind mammography, you're dosing your breast tissue with radiation along with compression. Now, you don't have to be a scientist to understand that radiation can cause cancer, and that radiation can be very, very unhealthy for your body. And so consistent compression, consistent radiation to the breast tissue has been shown and documented in journals such as the British Journal of Radiation. It's been shown to possibly increase your risk of cancer and causing mutational problems up to 6 times because of the low dose radiation. Think about, what if there was a micro tumor in your breast, and you add that compression and you add the radiation? What do you think that may do to increasing your risk of growing that tumor because of the radiation and the compression? Here's another quote from the British Journal of Radiology. It says, low energy X-ray radiation from mammography causes DNA damage that may result in the increased risk of breast cancer. So again, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that radiation may cause cancer.
Proponents of mammography tell you that it's very little radiation. In fact, it is very little radiation in terms of the amount of radiation absorbed doses that come out of the camera. What they don't tell you is that if you go through a screening at an airport, you're getting that much radiation when they screen you in a 6-foot window. When they're doing a mammogram, they're doing it at a 6-inch window. So they're taking that same amount of radiation and compressing it into a very small surface area.
I really didn't know what a diagnostic mammogram was. Well, the next thing you know, we're in the the squishing machine, as I love to call it, and they bring it down nice and slow, and they bring it down and go, okay, and then I figured at this point it's like, okay, that's enough, and that's when it was announced to me by the technician. They go, okay, hold on, the next part is going to hurt really bad. I'll be as quick as I possibly can, but the next part is going to hurt. And then that's when that machine slammed down on my breast so hard that I couldn't breathe. And fluid came from my nipple. And I had hung onto the machine so hard that I had bruises on my arm. I was so immediately traumatized. I was like almost like a zombie. Like you had just been in a car accident and you don't know what the heck happened. And I was just literally numb. And as I stood there, I saw other women coming into this imaging, and I thought to myself, I wonder what they're here for. Are they here for the same thing? Should I tell them? Should I tell them, don't do this? That I couldn't believe these people did this to me. That how could they be so callous? How could they not tell me ahead of time that this is what a diagnostic mammogram is? And oh, by the way, we notice in your reports that you have dense breasts, and maybe we can recommend something else for you. Because it was only through my own research that I had found out that there are other options for women as a whole. And then I also found out, in particularly for women who have dense breasts and fibrocystic and fluid-filled lumps and stuff like that, that there are other things that can be done to get a reading of what is happening in the breasts. And it was such a horrific experience, and I don't want anybody to go through what I went through. I told all my girlfriends, they were horrified. And I said, don't ever do this. Run as fast as you can. Never go through this. Never have a mammogram. Never allow them to hurt or damage or compromise your gland.
Another thing about mammograms is the compression of the breast tissue. And, as a woman, you instinctively know this is wrong. It's being smashed, it hurts, it feels like something's popping, it's not right. And I think it could have contributed to worsening of my condition, and I'm sure in many people's cases it does. When you squash something that's not good and you smash it and bruise the tissue, you're going to have leakage out into the surrounding area, perhaps traveling of cells and blood going out into the tissues and things. And I think that's really a danger another danger with mammogram beyond the radiation, just the bruising. And it's brutalizing. It's inhumane. There's no reason to treat a woman this way.
Breast imager for over 20 years, so I know firsthand how painful it is to have a woman who's been getting regularly screened for breast cancer come in with a new lump that turns out to be a cancer. And she's completely devastated because she's been doing the right thing and yet gets a breast cancer that wasn't detected by screening. The reason that happens is because of dense breast tissue. And the problem is that on a mammogram, dense breast tissue looks white and cancer looks white. So it's been described as trying to pick out a snowball coming at you in a blizzard. You just can't see it coming. This will show you what I'm talking about. This is a woman with very little breast density, and here's a woman with almost a whiteout breast density. Both of them have a 7 mm invasive breast cancer. The woman without dense breast tissue, you can see her little cancer right there. This woman, you can't see her cancer. It actually turned out to be at about 12 o'clock somewhere in this region, but it's completely covered by her dense breast tissue. So we have other tools, but women don't know to ask for them. In fact, most physicians are not even aware of this problem.
The one thing I did want to point out was that with a new 3D mammography, where there are multiple photographs or x-rays taken for the same mammogram, there's about a 3% higher radiation involved now. So even though they might be a better mammogram and you might be able to see more, it's going to be more radiation for that woman. So I think we're going to have to screen who gets those mammograms, who is going to be at risk for, who's going to take the risk for having higher radiation to find a cancer. And I think that's really important.
So then they tell me, you know, we have this new thing called 3D mammography. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a 3D mammogram. And then again, what they don't tell them is before we take a 3D mammogram, we're going to take a regular mammogram, and then we're going to take 3D images using a CAT scanner, which means you're getting 3 to 4 times the radiation you were getting with a regular mammogram, and you're not getting any better resolution or any better answers. So we have this myth that's propagated upon the females of this country, because most men don't have mammograms, that mammograms save lives. Well, I don't understand that, because if a mammogram is showing you a tumor, if you already have the tumor, what are you going through for longevity? You know, and what is the quality of your existence after that? And more importantly, going back to Dr. Brawley, did you really need all that anyhow? Because the mammogram is unable to differentiate between cancers. We understand that no diagnostic test that's available for breast disease diagnoses cancer. Biopsies diagnose cancer. Other tests will give you the idea that they might localize a lesion, but they don't diagnose cancer. So you now have women who are having biopsies, lumpectomies, mastectomies. I have women that come in and had mastectomies for DCIS. It's revolting. And we're going through all this with this great tactic of fear. If you don't have this done, you could die. If you don't have this done, it's going to spread through your body. And that's not based on science. That's based on the fear factor. The Nordic group, the Cochrane group in Norway, studies outcomes. They take data from all over the world and they look at the data outcomes, and they take these outcomes and they publish them, and they rarely offer opinions because they're data people. But they offered an opinion in mammography. So they went on to say that the best way not to have cancer is to not have a mammogram. Now that's an independent research study. In 2014, the country of Switzerland shut down mammography altogether. They shut down first all the new mammographic equipment and then offered a bill to shut it down altogether. In Italy, the Prime Minister of Italy, back in the early 2010, 11, something like that, made thermography the diagnostic test, what he called it, of choice in breast disease, even though there's still mammographic equipment. In Germany, it's the diagnostic modality of choice. In Poland, it's the diagnostic modality of choice. Most of the thermographic literature comes from Japan. In Brazil, there are thermographic cameras in emergency rooms because they're looking for various problems with fevers. So they're in most of the emergency rooms in Brazil. So we're a bit backwards here in this country, even though the thermography started here. We're still behind the curve, mostly because of the politics and the FDA.
We need to take a breath and recognize that the cut, burn, and poison approach to cancer is not the gold standard in terms of what we can do to promote our overall health and longevity. To make that your sole mode of therapy and then to start to poison the body further without trying to give your system the support to systemically reduce the inflammation that allowed the thing to occur in the first place is completely fallacious in my opinion.
I'm not saying that there's not a woman's life out there that has been saved by a mammogram, because there probably is. But if there's a woman over here whose life has been saved, then there's 5 over here that their lives were taken because of the radiation, because mammograms cause cancer. Groups that are saying, get mammograms, the American College of Radiologists, well, could they receive a benefit from that? Susan G. Komen, did they receive a benefit? Well, if you look at their benefactors, Siemens, GE, all the big mammogram makers, there's benefit. You have to look behind the scenes to see why certain doctors are recommending them and certain doctors aren't. Well, it all has to do with the money flow.
And they say, stay away from x-rays if you don't want to get cancer, and then they say, oh, you got cancer, let's give you some x-rays. There's something, it's cognitive dissonance there. So I think that all of that needs to be challenged. And then hidden behind all of that is the issue that the assumption is that, well, if we find a breast tumor, that's good because now we can treat it. Early detection is the key there, you see. But what are they going to treat it with? Oh, they're going to start treating it with radiation, perhaps, more cancer-causing procedures. They may try chemotherapy, which is destructive of the immune system, and that causes cancer. So, in my view, it's just it's crazy. I just have to say I'm not a doctor, and I want to tell everybody that up front. But from my independent research and the lessons I have learned, I think that would be the last thing in the world that I would want to do. Now, is that advice? No, this is a decision that everybody has to make for themselves. But I think before you run down that path, you ought to do some reading, get a second opinion, talk to people who have a different point of view, make up your own mind. I think it's the only way to go.
You should appreciate that there are other things you can do, and you can see other practitioners. So if you go to your general practitioner, and that person looks at you and says, you have got to have a mammogram. Well, what if you ask that person the question, can I do something else? And they say, absolutely not. The only thing you can do is have a mammogram. Well, there are alternatives, and you need to understand that there are alternatives. But more importantly, you need to understand it's your body, it's your health. You have a protected right to refuse to receive a treatment you don't want, and you have a right to pursue the course that you think is in your own best interests. And it doesn't mean that you have a right to unapproved medical devices or drugs. The law still prohibits that. But you have a right to choose alternatives that are legal, and those things can be available to you if you just look. It's out there. It's just sometimes difficult to find. But once you get locked into the right community of people, you'll see that they'll be able to guide you in finding those alternatives.
It's your body. You do not ever, ever have to get a mammogram again, period. the doctor or the nurse practitioner or whoever's trying to force you into that, just say no. Stand up, say no, and if you have to, say hell no. But one way or the other, say no.
We're all different. Some women are too young to have mammograms. Some women's personal values do not, they are not going to have a mammogram, like myself. Like, that would not be something I would ever consider. So is the federal government basically taking our rights away by demanding that we only use mammography and everything else is an adjunct to only that? That just doesn't make sense.
I think that one of the tragedies of modern medicine, at least in this country, is that people have relied on mammograms for so long to diagnose breast cancer. And it really hasn't turned out to be as good as we wanted, and in fact may be dangerous. Patients are overdiagnosed, they're overtreated, and the treatments aren't benign by any means. Chemotherapy, radiation, for tumors that really wouldn't ever cause them a problem. But it's extremely hard for a patient to sit on a diagnosis of a precancerous lesion and not want to go and do everything they possibly can for it because they're frightened. And it really is all about fear. The media promotes this, the medical profession promotes this. It's a total waste of healthcare dollars for annual mammograms to be done for everybody. There's recent studies that have shown that an examination by a physician once a year is as valuable as a mammogram in terms of longevity. And on the mammogram side, more tumors are diagnosed, but they don't need to be, and they don't need to be treated. Patients are just living with a diagnosis of breast cancer when they really didn't need to at all. So there are other imaging techniques now that are more predictive. They may not be as good at mammograms as diagnosing a lesion, but they're more predictive, and we can see abnormalities in thermography, for instance, that are precursors to cancer and that can be changed with a change in diet, a change in medicine, a change in lifestyle.
So what are the alternatives? What can you do? Well, we're talking about thermography, and thermography has been a technology that I personally adopted back in 2005, and it was very, very helpful for me in monitoring my health as I was going through my journey. Now, thermography is wonderful because there's no compression, there's no touching, there's no radiation. And basically the technology behind thermography is very simple. What it's doing is it's reading the infrared heat that's being emitted from your body, and it's picked up through the camera and translated into a software onto the computer as an image. Red indicates more heat. Blue and green is cooler, so that lets us know that there's less heat in that area. Now, what does heat have to do with your breast health? Well, we know that if we sprain an ankle, what happens? Inflammation sets in, it puffs up, it gets hot. Well, the same thing happens in your breast tissue. If there's an imbalance in the tissue, if there's physiological changes that are occurring that's causing more inflammation in the breast, whether it's hormone imbalance or whether it's the development of more blood flow to feed a tumor, that's called angiogenesis and neovascularity, or new blood flow, because cancer is very smart. It's going to create its own blood flow to feed that tumor. So if there's more heat in the breast area and there's specific patterns, then that can alert you to the fact that there's some issues going on in the breast. Now, thermography will not and cannot diagnose breast cancer or any type of cancer. What it can tell you, though, is that there are physiological changes going on in the breast tissue and can alert you and your physician to be very proactive about what needs to be done when it comes to your breast health.
What I've recommended ever since I've found this technology is thermography. Thermography measures the temperature change in the cells in your breast to allow the technician and the practitioner to know if you have rapidly dividing cells, which are hotter than the other cells. And the difference in temperature may be very minuscule, but it can be measured. And that's the way to follow your breast health. The thermography can find some extra temperature changes or extra activity in your breasts long before anything abnormal can be diagnosed by mammography or by biopsy. And in the hands of naturopathic doctors or holistic doctors, we know what to do to detoxify the breast. We know to take extra magnesium, to use some castor oil packs, to detoxify the whole body, to use coffee enemas to detoxify the liver and support the hormones by detoxification. So we know what to do, whereas thermography will probably never catch on in allopathic medicine because they don't know what to do 5 years before the cancer shows up. They will wait on your test until something shows up and then they'll do surgery. So it's really, much more effective to do the thermography, do it every year or 2 years, and not even wait for anything to happen, but follow a lifestyle where you're detoxifying, you're taking plenty of magnesium, and you never develop breast changes.
Well, what if we could find a disease process occurring earlier? Well, that's what thermal imaging is about. Long before something ever developed that was imageable, that would cast a shadow or reflect sound waves, there was a process going on there. Because cells, as they go bad, they produce heat, they produce nitric oxide, they produce inflammation, and all of that is imageable. And part of the process which causes that initially is lymphatic congestion. That is also imageable on infrared imaging or thermography. So we can see the causative factors of disease coming down the road with thermal imaging and therefore prevent the disease from ever happening. Wouldn't that be awesome to never have to treat a disease but to prevent it?
So thermography is a wonderful tool to have to assess your breast health. Now, is it 100% accurate all the time? No, just like any other test is not 100% accurate all the time. According to statistics, it's typically between 90 to 97% in finding physiological changes in the breast tissue. And that's a pretty significant number. And what most people don't realize is that thermography has been around for many, many decades. And there are over 800, possibly closer to 900 now, independent studies that have shown the benefits and the technology of how useful thermography can be.
So starting with thermography to monitor for subtle physiological changes starting in your 20s. A 20-year-old woman in her 20s could have a thermogram maybe every 3rd year, but it helps her engage in knowing exactly how her breasts work and not having that attitude of that fear-based culture that we seem to have created of just crossing our fingers and hoping that we don't get cancer. So every year when a woman goes in and gets a mammogram, she's basically crossing her fingers and hoping that she's not told probably the most devastating news that she'll ever get in her life.
When you see that there's these technologies that we have failed to embrace and choose the exact opposite, it makes you wonder, what are we really doing in healthcare? Why have we failed to first do no harm? Where did we go wrong that we lost our prime directive? We blind ourselves to hearing information that doesn't fit our paradigm. And that's where we really need to change as a society. We need to be willing to take our truth, whatever it is right now, and put it off on the side and truly open our mind and our heart and study things out if there's a chance that what we're doing might be doing somebody else harm. That's got to happen.
So every woman's unique, and she should determine with her doctor what are the best screenings that would be best for her.
Best screening and what's acceptable to them, because even MRI scan, which is our gold standard, requires that women have intravenous injections of gadolinium, and gadolinium is a heavy metal. And so that heavy metal gets directly input into your veins and has to get excreted. And we know that there's kidney and skin problems with that for some people. So it's not necessarily safe for everybody.
So there is a large industry that has evolved out of this. Mammography is ionizing radiation. There is just no question, it's non-controversial. It increases your risk of cancer. The question is, how much does it increase it? This physiological alternative that you're referencing, which is an interesting way of referencing it, I hadn't heard that approach before, but it makes a lot of sense, just like taking your oral temperature. You're looking for signs of temperature change. And with mammography, you have ionizing radiation. But with thermography, there is no radiation, but you are measuring a form of heat radiation that you are making, that the instrument's not making, that you are making. And the sensor is detecting your radiation. And the reason why it's so effective is because it detects it at a far earlier stage, because typically it detects it when it's not seen by mammography, when it's in this inflammatory condition. And part of the process of inflammation is increase in temperature, which is what this device detects.
Much more empowering. I mean, I guess my whole goal and my life mission now is to make sure that women have all of their information, all of their facts about the strengths and weaknesses of all of our options, so they can make the decision that is best for them. Because I know how fear-based it is. I was there with my mother when she got diagnosed, and immediately it's like you're going across the hall, you're having this thing taken off, you know, without, you know, they're expecting women to make decisions when they're basically being chased by a lion. Like you're in the most incredibly stressful situation that you've ever had in your life, most likely, because you're fighting for your life or you're fearing for your life, and now you have to make all these life-altering decisions. Well, ladies, nobody wakes up with those decisions but you. You know, not your doctor, not your oncologist, radiologist, surgeon. It's about taking a breath and not being forced into anything you're not comfortable with. Having a mammogram or a thermogram or anything that you're not comfortable with. And especially once it gets to a more serious situation, your hair is not on fire. So I just want to make sure that women have all of their information so they can make the most, you know, the best decision for them personally.
Important message that tends to be suppressed quite effectively by these large corporate interests that have billions of dollars or tons or maybe even hundreds of billions of dollars to be generated through the traditional diagnostic
Absolutely.
process
it's
that's
quite
being
the
used
machine.
commercially. Yeah, and it is a machine.
What do you think about hormones and how they affect women's health, and then possibly how they could lead to cancers, or how does that? I mean, there's a lot of fear based around estrogen.
Yes, I hope that fear is diminishing. I'm a very pro-hormone oncologist, which is like an oxymoron. So estrogen and progesterone, testosterone, all of those hormones help regulate our health. They help keep us in good shape. They help regulate other hormones such as insulin, so which is an important hormone as we get older. A lot of adults become more insulin resistant. So believe it or not, estrogen and testosterone help reduce insulin resistance. So overall, that helps improve our health, and not only does it keep our skin looking nice. I always tell women, if your skin's looking nice on the outside, the skin on the inside has to be kept in good health as well, or looking good too. So I am pro-hormone. And there's more and more data coming out that estrogen alone actually reduces the risk of breast cancer by 23%. Can you imagine that? That's like the biggest risk reduction ever. But nobody wants to talk about it very much.
You know, it's really interesting when I ask audiences how many people think your genetics has a major impact on whether you develop breast cancer or not. You know, hands will come up. Well, genetics means practically nothing. So usually they go, well, it runs in my family. Half the time it's because you all ate the same, you had the same lifestyle, you know, and so that's why, you know, it's higher in your family. Now there is a genetic form called the BRCA gene mutation 1 and 2. And we used to think that, you know, our DNA was just this static molecule, kind of the information for our anatomy and physiology, and that it didn't change. Well, since we mapped out the human genome, there's been all sorts of new information that we've gotten as far as the fact that everything affects our DNA and how it expresses itself. So every food that we eat, it gets broken down into these little chemicals that will actually hook onto the DNA and turn certain genes on and turn certain genes off.
I know genes fit in there someplace, but they're way down in the single digits. Most everything that we do, we can change. In fact, we now know that we can code around bad genes. So just because you have a bad gene is no reason to do anything drastic like losing your breast, because it is not, the genes are not the be-all to end-all. Genes are just building materials. And what we think affects that, what we do, what we put in our body, and how we manage it all is so much more important than a gene. And we now know that the body can code around bad genes, literally code around them under the right circumstances. So don't let that gene thing get you caught and make you do something that you might regret.
When I see women that receive their genetics and they find out that they have the gene that potentially would facilitate cancer if the circumstances were adverse in their life, and they go get a mastectomy, my jaw drops. I'm like, okay, you didn't even have a problem and you decided to remove tissue? I'm sorry. That's when we've really, the train has completely derailed from the tracks. Those types of actions create much more inflammation and scar tissue and problems down the line than the supposed benefit of avoiding a cancer. Because remember, a cancer in the breast is not a cancer just in the breast. It's an inflammatory process in the whole body, and it just manifests in that tissue.
When we're looking at health and wellness and doctors healing in this fashion, it feels barbaric to me. It's very hard for me to hear about women and about doctors who are women who are suggesting these types of surgeries to their patients. I find it unnecessary. If a diagnosis is made, then I think options should be made about how we're going to treat this breast cancer that has shown up. But until then, I find no reason to go in and cut out breasts.
What's very difficult for her to deal with is all of the flack that she gets from her family, her friends, her doctors, her surgeons who are now involved, all of those people that are using fear and bullying actually to get her to do, I guess I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say that they have her best interests at heart. But she needs to get in tune with herself and make an educated decision as to what's best for her.
Of course, you're first in shock. The shock is so bad that sometimes you go numb. You feel like you've just been hit by a Mack truck. You have no idea what to do next. But the doctor's in front of you telling you, okay, we can schedule you for surgery next Thursday. Will that fit in with your schedule? And you want to say, just a minute. I don't know anything yet. I didn't have cancer in my family. I didn't have friends that had cancer. I didn't know anything yet. And I wanted to tell him, wait. I mean, I've had this in my body for the last, for sure, 2 years, who knows, 5 years growing. I need a week or two to figure out what to do. I didn't know how long I needed, but I needed some time just to breathe and figure out how to get control back.
There are other things that you can do to find out if there's issues going on in your body when it comes to your breast health. There are blood tests. They're now called liquid biopsies that can help you to determine if there's the presence of cancer cells in the body. Some will determine if there's free cancer cell DNA in the blood. Others will look at specific hormones and enzymes to see if there's cancer cell production. Another important test to look at are inflammatory markers. If there's inflammation in your body, then that may be an indication that there's some imbalances going on. Be empowered, be proactive. Don't fear cancer the way traditional medicine has taught us to fear cancer. Cancer is a metabolic disease, and there's a reason why cancer has developed. Cancer is present in the body because there's an imbalance in your health, in your emotions, there's toxicity, your immune system is suppressed, and these are all things that you can work on to move towards creating vibrant health.
I think if you back away from the issue of breast cancer and just deal with cancer in general, if I were told or suspected that I had cancer, I wouldn't need to run out and test and see, well, do a biopsy or something, because we know if you cut into a tumor, sometimes little cells go into the bloodstream and they'll travel around, and so the act of testing for it actually spreads it. I mean, okay, if you suspect that you have cancer, or if I suspect that I have cancer, I'm going to start treating it. I don't have to test it. I said, well, what if I do, what if I don't? If I have a natural treatment, that builds the immune system, that's supportive of my health and not destructive, well, then there's no harm in treating it.
It's the opportunity to do kind of an inventory of your entire life. How are you eating? What are your relationships like? There's so much information about the relationship between breast cancer, diseases in our body, our emotions, and our relationships have a huge impact. Really, this opportunity to kind of revamp your whole life so that it's in alignment, with who you are and achieving the best health. And when people take that on, it's like, I've seen people who've had stage 4 cancers where it's metastasized everywhere, and it's gone away.
The takeaway really should be that Western medicine is backwards, that we are looking to make people unsick, as opposed to Eastern medicine, which is looking to keep people well. Eastern medicine has been around a whole lot longer than Western medicine, so they must be doing something right. And I encourage women to be proactive in their health.
I think we need to really examine what's going on in the health industry, health and wellness industry, with medical schools, with the amount of nutritional advice that doctors are given and taught in those medical schools, and really examine how much they know about the preventative measures found through lifestyle and diet.
Teach your children, teach your daughters breast health right from the beginning, to be in charge, to be responsible for what they put into their bodies, for how they take care of their bodies in general, and especially the breast.
I think patients need to be involved in their own care, and they need to find practitioners who will team up with them to do so. It's not just a matter of seeing a patient once a year and getting them on their way. I think that a patient needs to be looked at as a whole person. We need to look at nutrition, lifestyle, medications, and just anxiety and stress. These are the things that a patient should be, a woman needs, in my opinion.
And I was asked a little while ago what kind of advice I would give, general advice for somebody with cancer. And I was thinking about that, and how do you summarize it? I would say there are two things. The first thing would be to respect nature. And the second thing would be to question authority.
I hope that this helps your life and proves it. And please be mindful of your health, and don't give away your rights to anyone.
I think we need more education instead of medication, and I know there's many that feel the same way. So thank you very much, and I always say salud. The word salud comes from salute, which means to your health.